Imagine walking past a homeless man on the streets of New York City, just another face lost in the crowd. But what if I told you that one moment, one unexpected encounter, changed everything? What if one of the most powerful men in the world stopped, noticed, and took action in a way that no one saw coming? This isn't just another story. It's a powerful reminder that one decision can alter a life forever. When Donald Trump walked out of a high-end hotel that night, he had no idea he was about to meet a man who had sacrificed everything for his country. But instead of walking past like everyone else, Trump did something shocking. What happened next? It's a story you won't forget. From the cold streets to the doors of Trump Tower, from hopelessness to a second chance, this is the incredible journey of a forgotten veteran who found help in the most unexpected way. If you believe in stories of resilience, kindness, and the power of one act to change a life, then stick around. And hey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing stories that deserve to be told. It was a crisp evening in New York City. The streets were alive with energy, honking taxis, the murmur of pedestrians, and the flashing lights of towering billboards. The air carried a slight chill, the kind that made people pull their coats a little tighter and quicken their steps. In the midst of the crowd, businessmen rushed to their next meetings, tourists posed for photos, and street vendors shouted about their latest deals. But among the constant movement, there was one figure who remained still. Near the entrance of a high-end hotel, where the wealthy and powerful came and went without a second thought, sat a man who had been forgotten by the world. His clothes were tattered, his shoes barely holding together, and his face, lined with the hardships of life, was partially hidden beneath the hood of an old military jacket. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't calling for attention. He simply sat there, wrapped in a worn-out American flag, its colors faded, its edges frayed. Most people didn't notice him, or perhaps they did but chose to look away. But then the grand doors of the hotel swung open, and out walked a man whose presence alone could shift an entire crowd's attention. Donald Trump. Dressed in a tailored suit, his unmistakable golden hair catching the glow of the city lights, he moved with his usual confidence, flanked by his security team. He had just left a high-profile event, one of those evenings filled with powerful conversations, flashing cameras, and firm handshakes. But as he approached his vehicle, something made him pause. His eyes landed on the man sitting alone on the pavement. For a brief moment, Trump just stood there. His security team, always on high alert, watched closely, unsure of what had caught his attention. He had seen thousands of people in his life, shaken hands with world leaders, stood before massive crowds. But this man, something about him was different. Perhaps it was the flag draped over his shoulders, worn but still wrapped around him with a sense of pride. Perhaps it was the stillness in his posture, the way he carried himself despite the hardships he had clearly endured. Whatever it was, Trump wasn't the type to ignore his instincts. Instead of continuing on his way, he turned to his security team and said something that stunned them. "Hold on, I need to talk to this guy." There was a split second of hesitation. It wasn't often that Trump went off script like this, but before anyone could say a word, he was already moving toward the man. As he approached, the man slowly looked up. His eyes were tired, filled with stories no one had taken the time to hear. Trump crouched down, lowering himself to the man's level. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice firm but not unkind. For a moment, there was silence. The man studied him, as if trying to decide whether this was real or some kind of joke. Finally he spoke, his voice hoarse, worn down by the cold and years of hardship. "James Carter, sir, U.S. Marine Corps." A Marine, a soldier who had once fought for his country, a man who had given everything and had been left with nothing. Trump's expression changed. His usual sharp confidence softened, replaced with something else, something rare, empathy. And in that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. Trump took a moment, letting the man's words settle in the air between them. James Carter, U.S. Marine Corps. A veteran, one of the brave men who had once stood on the front lines for his country. And now he was sitting here, on the cold concrete of a New York City sidewalk, with nothing but a tattered flag around his shoulders. For a man like Trump, who had spent decades in the business world, who had built towers that touched the sky, it wasn't often that something truly made him pause. But this did. James shifted slightly, adjusting the flag on his back, almost as if it were the last piece of dignity he had left. He wasn't looking for pity. He wasn't asking for anything. But Trump could see it, the wariness in his face, the quiet pain in his voice. "You served?" Trump asked, though he already knew the answer. James gave a small nod. 2 tours overseas, Afghanistan, then Iraq. His voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it, like every word carried a memory too heavy to fully unpack. Trump stayed silent, waiting. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to get the truth was simply to listen. After a deep breath, James continued, "I came back, tried to get back on my feet, but things don't always go the way you plan." He gave a dry chuckle, but there was no humour in it. "Got hurt, spent months in the VA in and out, bills piled up, lost my apartment, lost my car, and, well..." He gestured vaguely around him, as if the city streets themselves were now all he had left. "Here I am." Trump exhaled, his gaze never leaving James. He had heard stories like this before, stories of veterans coming home only to find that their battles weren't over, that the war had followed them in different ways. But standing here, hearing it firsthand from the man himself, was different. "How long?" Trump asked. James shrugged. "A while now. You stopped counting after the first year." That answer didn't sit right with Trump, not at all. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and without hesitation grabbed a thick stack of bills. "This is for tonight," he said, handing it to James. "Get yourself a hot meal. Get a place to sleep." James stared at the money, his fingers hesitating before reaching for it. He wasn't used to kindness, not like this. "Sir, But Trump wasn't finished. He turned to his staff, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Book him a hotel, not just for tonight, for as long as he needs." James blinked, stunned. This wasn't real. Things like this didn't happen, not to people like him. Trump crouched down again, looking James directly in the eyes. "I'm going to help you," he said, "and I don't break my promises." For the first time in a long time, James Carter believed in something again. James sat in stunned silence, gripping the cash in his rough, calloused hands. He wasn't sure what to say, or if there was anything he could say. For so long he had been invisible. People passed by him every day, avoiding eye contact, pretending he didn't exist. But now, here was Donald Trump, not just acknowledging him, but offering real help. Trump's security team and staff exchanged glances. This was unexpected, unscripted. They had seen him make big decisions before, but this was different. There were no cameras rolling, no press releases being drafted. This wasn't about politics or business. It was simply a moment between 2 men, one who had served his country and another who refused to let that sacrifice be ignored. James swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing on him. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Trump placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that this isn't charity. This is what should have been done for you a long time ago." James could feel the lump forming in his throat. He had been through battles, both overseas and here at home, but nothing had prepared him for this kind of kindness. Trump turned back to his staff. "Make sure it's a good hotel, somewhere comfortable, and get him new clothes, a warm meal, whatever he needs." His tone left no room for debate. His people nodded, immediately making calls to secure everything. James still looked skeptical, not because he didn't appreciate the help, but because he had been let down too many times before. Promises had been made to him in the past, by the government, by charities, by people who said they wanted to help but never followed through. He looked Trump in the eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Trump didn't hesitate. "Because you fought for this country, and no one who serves should be left behind." James nodded slowly, absorbing the words. Moments later, a black car pulled up to the curb. "That's for you," Trump said. "They'll take you to the hotel. Get some rest. We'll talk more soon." James hesitated for just a second, as if afraid this would disappear if he blinked. Then, with a deep breath, he stood up. His movements were slow, his body aching from years of hardship, but there was a shift in him, a sense of dignity returning. Before stepping into the car, he turned back to Trump. "Thank you. he said simply. Trump nodded. This is just the beginning. And for the first time in years, James allowed himself to believe in something better. The next morning, James woke up in a warm bed, a real bed. Not a park bench, not a subway station floor, not the hard concrete of a city sidewalk, but a bed with clean sheets and a soft pillow. For a moment, he just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince himself this wasn't a dream. The night before had been a whirlwind. After Trump's unexpected act of kindness, his staff had moved quickly. They had taken James to a high-end hotel, given him fresh clothes, and made sure he had a hot meal before he slept. It was more than he had in years. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his greying hair. The warmth of the room, the simple comfort of a mattress beneath him, it all felt foreign. Almost unsettling. He had spent so long preparing himself for the worst that even now he couldn't shake the feeling that this was temporary, that it would all disappear as quickly as it had come. Then the phone rang. James hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A professional but friendly voice greeted him on the other end. "Mr. Carter, this is Amanda from Mr. Trump's office. He wanted me to check in and make sure you're comfortable." James was caught off guard. He had expected to be forgotten the moment he left the sidewalk last night. Instead, they were following up. They actually meant it. Yeah, he said after a moment. "It's nice, I appreciate it." Amanda didn't rush him. "That's good to hear. Mr. Trump asked me to personally handle some next steps for you. First, we're going to get you set up with a full medical evaluation. We know you've been out in the cold for a long time, and we want to make sure you're healthy. Second, we're arranging a meeting for you later today. Mr. Trump has a job offer for you." James nearly dropped the phone. A job? His first instinct was disbelief. Why would Trump, a billionaire, be going this far for him? It didn't make sense. People had offered help before, small, temporary things. A few dollars here, a meal there, but a job, that was something else entirely. I don't know what to say," James admitted, gripping the phone tighter. "No need to say anything yet," Amanda said kindly. "Just be ready at noon. A car will pick you up and take you to Trump Tower. Mr. Trump wants to meet with you personally." James hung up the phone, staring at the wall in disbelief. For years he had felt like a ghost. A man who had once been part of something greater, only to be discarded when he was no longer useful. But now someone had not only seen him, they had decided to do something about it. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. At exactly noon, James stood outside the hotel, his hands tucked into the pockets of the new jacket that had been provided for him. The bitter New York wind bit at his skin, but for the first time in years he didn't feel the cold in the same way. Something had changed. A sleek black SUV pulled up in front of him. The driver, a sharply dressed man, stepped out and opened the door. "Mr. Carter?" James hesitated for a moment before nodding. "That's me." "Mr. Trump is expecting you." With a deep breath, James stepped into the warm vehicle. As the car weaved through the city streets, he couldn't help but reflect on how drastically things had changed in less than 24 hours. Just yesterday, he had been invisible. Today, he was being driven to Trump Tower for a meeting with one of the most powerful men in the world. When the car pulled up to the towering glass building, James felt a lump form in his throat. He had never stepped foot in a place like this. The sheer size, the luxury, the weight of success, it was overwhelming. But before he could overthink it, the driver opened the door for him, and a woman in a sleek business suit greeted him with a warm smile. "Right this way, Mr. Carter." James followed her through the grand lobby, up a private elevator, and into a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. And there, standing behind a polished desk, was Donald Trump himself. Trump turned as James entered, his sharp blue eyes locking onto him immediately. He stepped forward, extending a hand. "James, good to see you." James hesitated for only a second before shaking his hand. "Thank you for everything." Trump waved off the thanks. "You don't owe me anything. This is about making things right." He gestured for James to sit as he took a seat across from him. "I've been thinking about you since last night," Trump began. "You've served this country, and you deserve better. No veteran should be left out on the streets. That's unacceptable." James nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. Trump leaned forward. I want to offer you a job. James felt his heart skip a beat. A job? That's right, Trump confirmed. I have businesses all over the country. Hotels, properties, security teams. A man like you, disciplined, experienced, willing to work hard. You belong in a place where you can thrive. James swallowed hard. I haven't worked in a long time. I don't even know if I'm qualified for anything. Trump shook his head. I don't believe that for a second. You're a Marine, right? That means you don't quit. That means you don't back down. I have positions available, hotel security, operations, even logistics. We'll start you off with something solid, give you the training you need, and make sure you're back on your feet. James could barely process what was happening. A real job, a fresh start. Trump studied him for a moment before adding, One more thing. I'm covering your housing for the next 6 months. No rent, no stress. You focus on getting back on track. James felt his throat tighten. He had spent years believing no one cared, that his service had been forgotten. And now, sitting across from him, was a man who not only saw him, but was changing his life. For the first time in a long time, James smiled. I won't let you down. Trump grinned. I know you won't. And just like that, James Carter's life had begun again.